Welcome to Tuesday's edition of Journey Through the Gospels. And today you read Mark chapter 2 and 3. And in these two chapters we see yet another run-in that Jesus has with the Pharisees. And specifically, the Pharisees take issue with Jesus and his disciples, accusing them of breaking the Sabbath. Now, we need to remember that the Sabbath goes all the way back to the Old Testament in Exodus chapter 20, when God gave them the 10 Commandments. And here's what it says. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your manservant or maidservant, nor your animals, nor the alien within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Now the Pharisees, they were legalists, and they loved everything pertaining to the law. So with this commandment, they would look at this commandment and say, okay, we work for 6 days, and the seventh day we take off of work. But what is work? I mean, we better define what work is, because we don't want to do too much on that Sabbath day and break the commandment. So they would start discussing what exactly is work, and so they would come up with something like, well, something that would be considered work is carrying something heavy. That's got to be work. And so they would then say, well, how heavy is too heavy? And so they said, well, we better come up with a list of some things. And so they come up with a list like, food equal in weight to a dried fig. If you carry something more than that, it's work. Or milk enough for one to swallow. Anything beyond that would be work. Or ink enough to write 2 letters of the alphabet. Now, if you carry enough for 3 letters in the alphabet, that's work. That's a sin. Or they would even argue about whether you could pick up a lamp in your own home and carry it across the room. Is that considered work? I mean, they would even argue about how many steps that you should be allowed to take on the Sabbath before it's considered work. So in Mark chapter 2 and chapter 3, the Pharisees really have 2 issues with Jesus and his disciples, and they're this. The first one is in Mark chapter 2, they see Jesus and the disciples walking through a field, and the disciples and Jesus evidently are hungry, and so they begin plucking off the heads of the grain and eating them. And then in Mark chapter 3, they're in the synagogue, and Jesus heals a man with a shriveled hand. And the Pharisees, on both of those occasions, accused Jesus and the disciples of breaking the Sabbath, because it was the Sabbath day that they did those things. And in their minds, they're going, you guys worked. Picking those heads off the grain, that's work. Healing on the Sabbath, that's work. You broke the Sabbath. And this is what Jesus responds to them with. In Mark 2, verse 27, he says, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And here's what Jesus is saying. The point is this, that the Sabbath was made for man's benefit. God gave the Sabbath to man for his benefit. And the bottom line is this, God's original intent of the Sabbath was so that you could have a day off each week. I mean, that was it, plain and simple. Because God knew that the human body was not built so that it could work 7 days a week, 365 days a year. That the body needs time every week to rest. And the Pharisees, they had taken something that God had given as a gift to bless man, and they had turned it into something that God had never intended. They had taken something that was so simple, and they had made it so complex. So complex that nobody could even understand it. And you know what? Observing the Sabbath, just as it was then, it's still beneficial to us today. I mean, the human body today is still not built or designed to work 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Our bodies and our minds need time off each week to rest. And I heard somebody say it this way. They said, the Bible says that someone who will not work is lazy, but someone who will not observe the Sabbath is disobedient. You know, and I have observed that in my life and the lives of others, this truth, that if we will not make the time for a Sabbath, a time of rest regularly, then we will be forced to take a Sabbath, sometimes an extended Sabbath. It's called getting sick. Maybe you've done that before. You've pushed so hard. You've worked so hard, and you just keep pushing. You say, I don't have time to rest. I don't have time to take off. And then you get sick and you are in bed for a week. And you say, I don't have time to take this off. But perhaps if we would have done the way God said and took time off regularly, little spurts of time each week, we wouldn't have got sick. You know, God's ways really are the best ways. He knows the best. He designed our bodies. He knows how we should live our lives. So my question to you is this: do you regularly take time off each week to rest? Now, I'm not saying, are there times each week where you just hang out in bed all day eating Cheetos and watching Netflix all day? I mean, nobody really has time for that. But just time each week where it's different than your normal work day, just some regular time where you rest and recuperate, get ready for the next week. I mean, you may have to actually put it on your calendar. You might say, well, I don't have time to do that. You may have to pull out your calendar and say, during this time on this day, I'm going to just relax during this time. If you'll schedule it, you're more likely to do it. And so I encourage you to do it the way God did. Observe the Sabbath. Find some time each week, and I bet you will see that you'll have more energy during your work week when you do it the way that God planned and designed it. That's going to do it for today. Tomorrow we're going to be in Mark chapter 4. Hope you have a great day, and I will see you tomorrow.